High def camera on. My girlfriend Katie, she thinks there's something in the house. I don't know.
You believe me, right?
Doors are locked, alarm is on. If anything walks through here, it's gonna leave a pretty good footprint.
Did you hear that? Oh my god.
There's footsteps in, but there's no footsteps out.
You cannot run from this. It will find you.
This woman, same things happen to her.
Oh god. I feel it breathing on me.
Looks like something bit you.
You stop following me with the camera!
I'm in control.
Paranormal Activity, rated R.
Please, 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 please.
You demanded it. Now playing in theaters everywhere.
And welcome to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast. My name is Jesse, and I'll be your host. Before we get started, please make sure you subscribe to the show on your podcatcher of choice, whether that's Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Be sure to give the show 5 stars and a 1 to 2 sentence review, and tell me what you think. If you'd like to follow the show on social media, you can do so on Instagram at Cult Cinema Circle, or on Twitter at Cult Cinecircle, or you can send me an email at cultcinemacircle@gmail.com. You can also follow me on Letterboxd at Jesse Kremp, JESSEKREMP, all one word, and all social media links will be put in the show notes. Now on with the show. So on today's episode, we're going to be covering a little film that is very foundational to the horror genre. It has spawned a whole franchise and really did a lot for the found footage genre of horror. And that movie is Paranormal Activity. So either it's Paranormal Activity 2007 or Paranormal Activity 2009. I mean, you take your thing. We'll get into that a little bit. Yeah, my first time seeing this film, I mean, I recently had just seen this maybe like last year sometime, or maybe the year before or something like that. I was never really much of the Paranormal Activity girl, you know what I mean? Like, I was never really that kind of horror fan. Found footage is not like, you know, I don't detest it or anything, but I'm also like not the hugest on it. I have watched quite a few different found footage movies. They all kind of depend, and you know, we'll get into how this one kind of affected everything, you know, in terms of that just subgenre. But overall, I think that this film, for the most part, I think it's perfectly good. Like, you know, it's fine. The story behind it, I think, is really interesting, and we'll dive into that today. But really, I think like these films definitely hit at a certain time, and it just kind of then is similar to something like Scream or Halloween or these movies that then had a bunch of things come after it. It's not surprising that this would then kind of affect it. But yeah, but as we normally do, we're going to go into, you know, a little bit about the figures of this movie, get into the cast and the crew. There's not much in terms of that anyway, because it's a very small cast and crew. And then we'll go into some background about this as well. So I think just in general, you know, found footage as we know it, like, of course we know that, like, if you are at all sort of a horror fan in any way, you know that, like, found footage is everything from back in, like, The Legend of Boggy Creek from the 70s. And you also have, like, The Faces of Death, which are like not actually real deaths, I don't think, or it's just like kind of weird shit, or even the Mondo movies where they had kind of like different weird found footage type things. And you know, even something like Ghost Watch from the 90s in the UK, we can go back and really look at all sorts of examples of these found footage movies. And this one in particular, I think definitely owes a debt of gratitude to the Blair Witch Project, which is interesting because that turns, you know, 25 this year, and it's been kind of a little in the horror news just because the actors of that movie are kind of going through their own thing about trying to rectify the issues that came along with that movie, and you know, just how much fucking money it made and how they never really saw much of it and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just think like there was definitely found footage before this, but this one definitely only hit at a particular time. So in terms of figures, this was released in the US. So it did premiere in 2007. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But the release date is September 25th, 2009. That is when it literally kind of did a wide release, more so than just kind of doing these demanded screenings. Again, we'll talk more about that. This runs 86 minutes, and it was distributed by Paramount once it actually got to the wide release stage. The budget for this movie is, the production budget was $15,000, and then the budget overall after post-production was $200,000, which is still pretty low budget. But just to know that, like, to literally make this movie, it only took $15,000 is kind of amazing, which then obviously with this, we get into our box office. So the opening weekend ranking gross of this at first was, it came in at 48 with $77,873 when it first released to the wide public. And then as time went on and it kind of got more traction, we then look at a domestic gross of about $107 million. So then internationally it did about 85 million. So overall it made 193 million, which is insane and crazy. Which is then why it ended up having like a bunch of sequels after it. So, and we'll talk more about that as well when we get into like the history and all that. Our Rotten Tomatoes score, we have 83% from critics out of 210 reviews, and then a 57% from the audience on the popcorn meter with about 250,000 plus ratings. And then Letterboxd users give this a 2.9 out of 5. Now, I will say we'll get more into this, but really the director, the writer, cinematographer, and editor of this film in particular is one Oren Peli. He only directed really this film, I think. He was involved in the other sequels that came after, and he also did write like the Chernobyl Diaries, for example. But a lot more of what he's done is being a part of this franchise, pretty much. We then have our actors, Katie Featherston, who again is very well known for being in these movies. She was in Paranormal Activity 2 and 3, kind of. And then Paranormal Activity 4, and then Paranormal Activity, the marked ones. She does show up a little bit in different parts. Same thing with Mika Sloat, who played Mika. Paranormal Activity 2, 3, and the marked ones is kind of where he shows up a little bit. Ashley Palmer, who is in this film as Katie's friend. She was actually in the movie Water for Elephants, which is based off of a book. I remember reading that book in high school, but I never actually saw the movie. It didn't have Robert Pattinson in it or something. I don't remember. Message me, let me know. And then Mark Fredericks, he plays the psychic guy, not psychic, but like he's kind of a psychic. He's like a paranormal investigator, like psychic dude. People think he's a priest. I don't think he's a priest. We'll get into that. The other thing he had done was actually a movie called Risk Cutters, a love story, which came out right before this, I'm pretty sure. And yeah, this isn't a very big cast, so there's not many other people to talk about in terms of that. But let's dive into a little bit of just the background of this movie. So, attempting to focus on believability more than just action or gore, Peli decided to shoot this movie with a home video camera. So, you know, as we know already, by the time 2007 rolled around, where this movie actually made its premiere, but this was all shot in 2006. But at this point, we really are looking at like a bunch of horror remakes, which my happy ass is in the theater for. So of course you have, like, we've talked about it before, but like Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 2003. You then have like the Amityville Horror in 2005. Also the House of Wax came out that same year. And then in 2006 you have like When a Stranger Calls. You then have Black Christmas from 2006, and then also The Hills Have Eyes as well, which I also saw in the theaters. But that's what you're looking at in terms of that. That's where we have a lot of that. We have Final Destination coming out. They had a lot of these movies as well that were coming, which they had at least 3 of them by 2006, I think, or 2007. So you have that going on. And, you know, then you had this like whole thing with Scream too. Like you also had like that whole kind of onslaught, but that kind of ended by the early 2000s. But that's what we're kind of looking at in terms of this. And so found footage really, you know, as I already stated, it was Blair Witch Project really that made a huge splash. But it's not like there was a whole lot of other found footage movies after this. And really, honestly, it was Saw, honestly, that was kind of had horror in a chokehold, because it just did well for people and people wanted to see fucked up shit, really. So this really kind of had that. And then Hostel had a little bit of that, where it was like Hostel 1 and 2 at least came out a little bit before this, or right around the same time. And then, but again, Saw, just like every year of the 2000s almost, there was like a Saw movie. And once Paranormal Activity came out and it ended up being successful, that is kind of where it got kicked off a little bit, which is kind of interesting to think. But back to our background. So yeah, in deciding on a more like raw and stationary format, so the camera was always, you know, sitting on a tripod or something else, and eliminating the need for a camera crew, which would just be more money. A higher degree of plausibility was created for the audiences as they'd be more invested in the story and also the characters. Pele says that the dialogue was just natural because really there was no script. This employed the same kind of thing that happened with Blair Witch Project, which was the actors, these two actors, were really given outlines of the story and situations to just improv, a technique known as retroscripting. And in casting the movie, he auditioned a couple hundred people before he then met Katie Featherstone and Mika Sloat. He auditioned them individually, and he then called them back to audition together. And he was just really impressed with the chemistry between them, saying if you saw the audition footage, you would have thought that they had known each other for years. And they actually said that they had seen the casting notice online on LA Casting, and Featherstone noted that they were only paid $500 for their work. Hopefully, and I don't have like the specifics of this, I really, really hope they went back and were able to get something to be able to get more money, especially since this movie did buku bucks. So hopefully they were able to do that. I don't really know the specifics. If anybody does, please let me know. This was shot out of sequence, as many films are, because of Pele's like self-imposed like 7 days shooting schedule. He would have preferred the story to have unfolded for the actors as he had envisioned it. And actually Mika, who had controlled the camera for a good amount of this film, he was actually a former cameraman at his school's TV station. So, Pele says it was a very intense week. They shot day and night. It was being edited at the same time. The visual effects were being applied as the acting footage was being finalized. And there were multiple endings that were conceived, but not all of them were shot. And we'll go over the different endings of this film as well. So you make this movie, and that's all fine and well, right? As I stated, this did screen at 2007's Scream Fest Horror Film Festival, which was a big film festival in LA, and it impressed an assistant at CAA, a person by the name of Kirill Baru, so much so that CAA signed on to represent Pele, because they were like, oh my God, like this was a really cool movie, like, I haven't really seen anything like this before, and at this level, and we want to try and do this. So attempting to find a distributor for the film or like directing work for Pele, the agency sent out like different DVDs of the movie to as many people in the industry as they could, and it was eventually seen by Miramax Films senior executive Jason Blum. We hate Miramax Films because of the Weinsteins, obviously, and also Jason Blum has his own problems as well. I don't have like strong opinions because I don't watch every Blumhouse movie. You can go out and find whatever you want about like Jason Blum. He gives me sketchy vibes a little bit, but what senior executive doesn't, but whatever. Anyway, but he thought it had potential. And actually, fun little fact, he'd worked somewhere where he actually kind of passed up the opportunity of being able to get the Blair Witch Project, and then went to Artisan. And maybe he was still working at Miramax or something at the time, but it came past his desk and he didn't end up taking it. And then he saw how successful that was. So he was like, I'm not making the same mistake twice. So this seems like it'd be really cool. And I want to, put my money behind it, put the money behind it, all that kind of stuff. He worked with Pele to re-edit the film. So again, the $15,000 budget that they had for production, they got more money to be able to do post-production stuff as well. So they re-edited the film. They submitted it to Sundance, which you tried to do to get your film noticed, but it was rejected. And the DVD also impressed DreamWorks executives Adam Goodman, Stacey Snider, and finally Steven Spielberg, who really liked the film, and then cut a deal with Blum and Pele. So the DreamWorks, which is why I think this is kind of a little bit of a DreamWorks picture a little bit. But the plan of this, the plan was supposed to be that they were going to remake this film with a bigger budget, with Pele directing, and to only include the original version as like an extra thing that you can see on the DVD when it was released. So they didn't really know what to do with the original, but they knew they wanted to do business with Oren Pele. So Blum and Pele, they agreed to do this, but they stipulated that they were like, you know what, we want to do a test screening of this film before we go ahead and do this remake, because we think it could be, done, it could be well received by an audience before we just remake it. And then during the screening, people began starting to walk out, and Adam Goodman, he thought that the movie was bombing, though, until he actually learned that the viewers were really just leaving because they were so scared. And he then realized with this that a remake would just be unwise, and instead Paramount Pictures, which had acquired DreamWorks in 2005, so that's why it's a Paramount picture, but it was a DreamWorks picture at one point, they bought the domestic rights to this film and the worldwide rights to any sequels for $350,000. So when the film was taken in by Paramount, several changes were made. Some scenes were cut, others were added, and the original ending was scrapped altogether, with 2 new endings being shot, which we'll go over. The ending shown in theaters during the film's worldwide release is the only one of the 3 to feature actual visual effects, and it differs from the endings previously seen at like Screamfest or in the Burbank screenings that had already happened. And the theatrical release was delayed indefinitely because Paramount had put all of DreamWorks productions on hold at this point. However, though, a screening for international buyers resulted in the sale of international rights in about 52 different countries, and it was only after Goodman ended up becoming the production chief at Paramount in June of 2009 this film actually ended up getting released, which is why people will say it's Paranormal Activity 2007 or Paranormal Activity 2009. In 2007, it's when it got, screened for the first time at Screamfest, but really it didn't do a full wide release until 2009. And really a lot of people, and if you remember this particularly during that time before it got the wide release, there was a lot of things with demand at screening. So this would show in different markets pretty much, and it would make it a point to kind of be like, hey, if you want this to come to your town, you should, demand it and go online and demand it, kind of a thing. So it was also shown at Slam Dance as well in 2008. It was shown at the Telluride Film Festival in 2009, right before the actual big release. And the version with the new ending was made after Paramount had gotten the film, and it was shown in college towns, so like Boulder, Colorado, Columbus, Ohio, Seattle, Washington, Madison, Wisconsin. 11 of the 12 venues sold out, with State College in Pennsylvania being the only exception due to a Penn State football game that was being held on that same night. But yeah, on his website, Orrin Pele invited people to demand when the film would be showing next by voting on this site Eventful, which was like the demand at screenings. And this was like one of the first times where a major motion picture was really using the service to virally market a film. Paramount then did like a big press release on Pele's website, which announced openings in a bunch of different markets. And yeah, it was just interesting because they hadn't really done that kind of thing before, really, which I just thought was really interesting. But yeah, and that's what happened with that. And the rest was kind of, I guess, history after that, because then it ends up doing really well. And it ends up being able to then spawn a whole franchise of movies being parodied in something like A Haunted House and, other things like that. So it's really interesting to kind of look at that and see how many things came after it that really could be influenced by it, for sure. So let's get a little bit into just some basics of the plot. So Katie, who is Katie Featherstone, she drives up to her boyfriend Mika's house, played by Mika Sloat, who they live in San Diego as she is moving in. Katie claims a evil presence has been haunting her since she was a child. So Mika decides to set up a video camera in their bedroom to record any paranormal activity, see what I did there, that occurs while they sleep. A psychic by the name of Dr. Fredericks, who's played by Mark Fredericks, he visits the couple and he suggests that Katie is being haunted by a demon, actually, that feeds off of negative energy and is intent on tormenting her. She said that something like this happened to her and her younger sister Christy when they were children, which is where the third movie comes into effect. He advises not to communicate with the demon without a demonologist, who he then refers them to, but Mika continues to then film and seek this out. So the camera captures many different strange occurrences during the night. So it starts off as minor sounds like flickering lights or bedroom door movements, but over time it starts to escalate into things like loud thuds, violent door slamming, and also demonic grunts and screeches. So for example, one night Katie appears to be in a trance, she gets up, she stands by the bed and staring at Mika for like 2 hours, and she goes outside, and none of this she then recollects the next day. And then so Mika gets the bright idea to bring a Ouija board into the home. Let me side note real quick. I do not play with Ouija boards like that. I can't do it. I wasn't even raised religious or anything like that, but like literally my mom has like an interesting story where she talked about how like her friend was playing with a Ouija board back in the 70s or something, and like the dog would not even come to the fucking like room or something. It was crazy. And I was like, you know what? We played around with Ouija boards back in the day, like when I was a kid and being dumb. Not no more. I don't think I can do it. It's not my bag. Anyway, but he brings a Ouija board to his house. Katie's fucking pissed when she finds this out, and the couple leaves the home for like a little date night, and the camera is recording this, and it records an unseen force like moving the little planchette around, and then it just spontaneously catches on fire. And so Katie is just like pissed off at Mika because he's just flippant really at this point, and she like pleads with him to just contact this demonologist because he's just like, this is all a bunch of bullshit, like it's not real, da 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 da. And it's fine to be skeptical, like I don't mind that, but it's also like you're just pissing this thing off, like what the fuck. So they do this thing where Mika's like, hey, I'm gonna like put baby powder on the floor like right outside where our room is, and if we catch anything, like we'll catch anything that's like literally stepped in this, so we'll be able to see at least something that's in our purview. We can actually see it. The couple then finds non-human footsteps on baby powder that Mika sprinkled in the hallway. Its path then leading to a burnt photograph of a young Katie in the attic, which she thought had been destroyed in a house fire. Which is funny because so I've only watched the first like 3 of these movies. I haven't watched the rest of them, but I know that the first 3, like the third one technically is when Katie and Christy are children. I don't remember there being a big house fire, which I just thought was interesting, but who knows? Maybe they did. Maybe they burnt that house down. I don't fucking know, dude. I don't remember exactly. Go watch the third one if you want to hear what I'm talking about. But like, yeah, I don't quite remember. Again, tell me if I'm wrong. I just watched it a few days ago. I was like, I don't remember there being a house fire. When did that happen? Anyway, so outsider intervention is unavailable. The demonologist is out of the country, probably over in like Exorcist land or whatever, in the fucking Middle East somewhere. And Dr. Fredericks is pretty much afraid of making this demon angry, which honestly, dude, I get it. The next night, Katie is then pulled from the bed by an unseen force, and Mika discovers a bite mark on Katie's back the morning after, which motivates him to get out of the house, but then Katie decides she wants to stay instead. And then on night 21, so 3 weeks into this, Katie gets out of bed again. She stares at Mika for another 2 hours before going downstairs, and then Katie screams profusely for Mika, and he quickly rushes to go and help her. Instead, though, Mika is then he screams in pain, loud thuds happen, and then a little bit of a moment, and then Mika's body is just like hurled at the camera, which knocks over this tripod in the room, and then Katie is standing there in the doorway with blood on her shirt. She then crawls to Mika's body, she looks up at the camera with a grin, and as she lunges towards the camera, her face takes on this like demonic snarl, and the scene cuts to black. And then in found footage fashion, they have an epilogue that states that Mika's body was discovered by the police and that Katie is missing. So that is how this ends. Well, at least the theatrical cut was. So then there's some alternative endings. So once Paramount got this movie, the original ending was only shown at one public event before being scrapped, and then 2 new endings were developed. One was theatrical release, which was the one I just said, and then this one was an alternate release, or an alternate ending that is available on home releases. So the original ending was supposed to be that Katie returns to the bedroom alone. She's covered in blood and she's holding a large kitchen knife, and she sits on the floor against the bed and rocks back and forth, and she does this for like literally 2 days, I think. So the next day, Katie's friend Amber, who we saw earlier, she leaves a concerned message at about 2 p.m. and visits the house at about 9 p.m. She discovers Mika's body, and then she runs away in panic, and then has gotten the police involved. 2 policemen, enter the house and reach the bedroom where they find Katie with the knife. And seeing them, Katie it returns to her normal state, and she asks about Mika. And after the attic door slams by itself, one of the officers panics and shoots and kills her. And then the camera fades to black as the police officers continue searching the house. And then an epilogue text pretty much dedicates this film to the memory of both Mika and Katie. So this ending was only shown publicly at 2007's Screamfest Film Festival. It was never released officially by Paramount or Blumhouse since its acquisition. And the original film, the original version of the film, dubbed the festival cut, was then leaked on, various forums and stuff, because it's the 2000s, and which then includes this ending. And then another alternate ending as well. After killing Mika off screen, Katie comes back upstairs, like in the original ending. She then closes and locks the bedroom door. She approaches the camera and she promptly slits her own throat before collapsing dead, and the scene then fades to black. So that's another thing that you have as well. That is another ending you could find on YouTube or something like that. That is pretty much the plot of One Paranormal Activity. But yeah, I mean, in terms of this movie, like, I think you definitely have to, in a way, you have to like kind of be in the right mood for this, because otherwise you're not going to like fully buy into this. So like definitely watching this on like a computer or something, or even your phone to a point, but like a computer or whatever, to kind of have that would be maybe the best way to watch it. Or you see it in a theater where, that's just, it's made to do that. So, there's that. But I overall think like with this film, so some of the themes and symbolism that are throughout this, right? I definitely think we're talking about just like psychological horror. So this really like taps into just like kind of the fear of the unknown. I mean, when you are, currently I am in a house where it is dark. I have my light on here, but like, the rest of the house is pretty dark because I record at night sometimes. And it can be fucking creepy when you're just like at home alone, or like you're, just, it's kind of weird, like, and so it's always that, fear of the unknown, or fear of your domestic space being invaded, not that I know whether or not like the place that they were living in San Diego was like, could be overwrought by like robbers or anything like that. But like, it's always a matter of like, you're afraid that someone's going to break in your house, or you're afraid that, where you're at is not safe and you have to be careful, and all this sort of stuff. But I do think like in this way, a lot of what we're seeing here is, when it's at night, it's when you're asleep, and you're seeing this weird shit go on, and that can really be freaky, especially when you see it after the fact, and Mika, if anything, he's an asshole throughout this whole movie, but like he is like looking at this stuff and he's like, oh my God, this is so fucking weird. What is going on? But again, his kind of machismo, if you will, has been really just something that is just annoying to see. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as well. But, I definitely think like I understand why this kind of has that, because a lot of this stuff is just like when you're sleeping, or it's when you're kind of most vulnerable. That's why the psycho shower scene is so famous, because you got to get a shower if you're going to be hygienic, right? So like, but it is the time where you're most vulnerable, and that's just, it's scary if something happens. You can't hear anything. Again, you're completely naked, kind of a thing. Like, it's just, and what if someone's just come and stab you? Like, it fucking creepy. So, what if someone's going to do something to you when you sleep? Like, you don't fucking know, But anyway, so yeah, that's definitely where the psychological horror comes into this, for sure. I also think what's really happening, and what's really interesting too, is this whole idea with Katie and Mika. So you can tell that like as time goes on, their relationship is just strained, right? And as if you watch the series, especially the first three movies, because I have watched those first three movies now, and as you can see, like there is lore going back to like when Christy and Katie were kids, and kind of why this is happening to these girls, which is just really creepy. I would definitely check out, I was watching the Dead Meat podcast, and they did a whole paranormal pool party, but they covered all of these films, and especially the first three. I would definitely check out those episodes as well. It's really interesting to kind of look at all of those and to really see how these all kind of come together. And yeah, the first three are actually pretty decent. I like the second one quite a bit. And then this one and the third one like are kind of on the same level for me. Again, I would not say these are bad films necessarily. They're just not always my cup of tea. But it is interesting to look at Katie and Mika's relationship though, because it just strains as time goes on. But interestingly enough too, I mean, like the thing is that like, I don't know, like it's a thing of like, what is Mika doing with Katie kind of a thing? Like, why is it? Because one of the big things as well is like with found footage, like you always kind of have to answer the question, like, why would you film this? Right. And it's kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, why would they be filming this? Because Mika himself is like a skeptic. So why the hell is he like filming this? And it's almost one of these things where you can kind of like gather whether or not like, what is he doing? Is he trying to commodify this? Is he going to like sell it to somebody? If there really is paranormal activity here, like what's exactly going on? Because again, like throughout the whole film, because he is kind of an asshole in this movie throughout, you know, and I think that can kind of ring true for just some people who have been in those kinds of relationships or who have had that kind of partner dynamic, if you will, where they're just like a little toxic or they're a little like overbearing or whatever it is. And so, you know, but you see their relationship strain throughout. And again, the big thing is that this demon, who we end up finding is named Toby, it's feeding off of this negative energy, and you just find that Katie and Mika have this negative energy. They maybe shouldn't be together, but for some reason, like she's younger than him kind of, and like not by like much, but still like, you know, she's a student, like, you know, he for some reason is wealthy. And then going into the lore of like 2 and 3, there's a reason why that all is. And I won't get into it here, but you can go and watch the movies yourself. But you then find out that like it's not an accident when you know that like Katie ends up being with somebody who is like wealthy-ish, and then Christy in the second movie, because it follows Christy in the second movie and her family, they're also in a position where they are pretty well off. But in the third movie, they are kind of well off, but like honestly though, like you'd find that the reason for that is because there was this deal made with the demons, you know what I mean, which is really interesting. But yeah, but like skepticism and just beliefs clash in their reactions to this haunting, and that's why their relationship is so strained too, because like Katie really believes this because it's been happening to her since she was a child. And I think a lot of people can also take that and think of it as like maybe it's been this like paranormal thing that's been happening, but you can also read this as just like other trauma that she may have experienced in general. You can go on about that, right? The different things that unfortunately kids have had to go through or that have experienced trauma because of, whether that be abuse or whether that just be like, you know, any whole host of things that a child and their family have had to go through. But she believes it because she's been experiencing this forever. And he doesn't believe it because for whatever reason, he just doesn't. And he can't seem to, even though he says he loves Katie and like he wants to be here for her, but like, does he really? Like, I don't know. It's interesting to look at this. And again, they're not a great relationship, honestly, but like, it's one of these things where that just adds to the tension of the movie, or at least these different, dynamics that are going on, which is really interesting. But yeah, and that's just something to kind of to look at and to be like, oh, okay, like this is what's going on, and this is what's just fueling this energy that, you know, Toby is, right? It's just feeding the demon, really, which is just very fascinating to me. And then also another thing too is just like looking at the use of technology throughout this movie, really seeing that like a video camera and a recording device, they're being used as a storytelling tool, but also as a symbol of the desire to control and understand the the supernatural as well. Because again, like I was saying, we've had other found footage movies, but in this situation, like, for example, the Blair Witch Project, that is very much like, okay, 3 students who are going to some, I think, community college or something. One of them has this like film production class, and like they borrow the camera, they borrow the equipment to then go and do this like little project, the Blair Witch Project. And then craziness ensues after that, and they're apparently then dead, and that's what the whole movie's about, right? Whereas this movie, again, it's kind of getting into like, why are they filming this? So why is Mika filming this? Is he filming this because he wants to actually try to understand the supernatural, or is he doing this to try to make a buck? You know what I mean? And then that goes back to just the relationship dynamics of like, well, how much does he actually love Katie if like he's kind of willing to manipulate her issue of this demon, right? Like of this thing that is obviously traumatizing to her and just very like, horrible, and she has this reaction to it. But yeah, it's just interesting to see, like, I don't know if Katie's trying to like use technology to understand this more, but she's just trying to see, like, if anything, like she's going along with it to be like, listen, I know about this already. Like this has been my life. So I know what's happening, but like, if you need to do this to believe it, then that's on you, buddy. It's just really interesting to kind of look at that. But this is also used as a storytelling tool. It's we're listening to fucking Audacity, which we see in this movie, which I am recording on right now, which is very funny. But the old version, oh my gosh, from like 2006 or whatever. A fun little fact, I actually used Audacity back in like 2010. I went to a journalism like little workshop for a week, and I was learning multimedia journalism, and one of the things I remember using for the first time was like 2009 I think, and I used Audacity for the first time, and then many years later when I make this podcast, like that's what I end up using, because it's what a lot of people end up using because it's free. But anyway, so but being able to like use video cameras or just like any of this stuff to try to like understand, but it's also a really interesting tool because we're looking at this as if it's like, this is evidence that was brought by the cops, and we're just now watching this, and it's kind of been strung together to kind of show what's gone on, and all of this, which is then how a lot of these movies, or a lot of these Paranormal Activity movies, that's how they are strung together. That's how they are put, which is really interesting. But yeah, I think the use of technology, and again, it hadn't really been like that for a ton of these movies, really. I mean, yes, Ghostwatch was like very much like it was a hoax, but it was very much like this TV program that, end up being fucking crazy, right? And even like I said, Blair Witch Project, that was very much like these kids went into the woods, and then they end up, they end up being killed by this like ghost or whatever. And all that, and mockumentary stuff, had been kind of a thing a little bit, but like, even something like around this time too, you have like, I haven't really actually watched this movie, but like, it's very much a meta film. Behind the Mask, The Rise of Leslie Vernon was also like a little mockumentary thing. And if I'm not mistaken, I have to remember this, but maybe the Poughkeepsie tapes might have been out by this point, or like a little bit, but that's a whole other story. We will not talk about the Poughkeepsie tapes right now, because if you want to watch a fucked up movie, go check that one out, because fucking it's weird. Anyway, but this one particularly, like, again, it's being able to try to understand the supernatural, but it's also a very interesting kind of storytelling tool as well, which I just thought, again, had only been happening so much, and I think also just like this movie in particular, like really uses that and ended up bringing it to its attention, and this was very much a movie where it's like, oh my god, you have to see this in a theater. Oh my god, it's so scary, you have to see it in a theater, kind of a thing. But that's kind of interesting. But yeah, in terms of the reception and like the cultural impact of this movie, and we'll get into that a little bit too. So again, this has 83% on Rotten Tomatoes, with about 7.1 out of 10. The critical consensus was that using its low budget effects and mockumentary method to great result, Paranormal Activity turns a simple haunted house story into 90 minutes of relentless suspense. And you have some folks who Like James Berendellini and Roger Ebert, they give it a 3.5 out of 4. Ebert states that it illustrates one of my favorite points, that silence and waiting can be more entertaining than frantic fast cutting and berserk FX. For extended periods here, nothing at all is happening, and believe me, you won't be bored. Owen Gleerman gave this an A- for Entertainment Weekly, and he called it frightening, freaky, and terrifying, and said that Paranormal Activity scrapes away 30 years of encrusted nightmare cliches. Bloody Disgusting has said that this is ranked 16 on their list of the top 20 films of the decade, with the article saying that Pele deserves props for milking the maximum amount of tension out of the spare modern setting, an ordinary cookie cutter tracked home in San Diego. It doesn't sound very scary, but Pele manages to make it terrifying. If you aren't white knuckling your armrests at least once or twice while watching it, you probably do not have a pulse. However, there are people who did not like it, and so you have some critics like Michael Carter of The Breeze who summed this up as all right, though denouncing its reliance on cheap jump scares and an even cheaper found footage style. And also, David Stratton of the Australian TV series At the Movies said it was extremely unthrilling, very obvious, very cliched. We've seen it all before. And then also Mark Savlov of the Austin Chronicle says this is an excruciatingly tedious YouTube gag, cleverly marketed to go viral. And Bill Gribben of Pop Matters listed the film as the second worst horror film of all time, writing that it lacked anything remotely redeeming for the seasoned horror fan or the seasoned fright fan, and was a waste of both time in concept and in execution. So yeah, there are some people who just didn't fucking like this, which I kind of get it, for sure. But it's needless to say, this movie has had an impact on the horror genre. I think it really just, at the same point where like Halloween kind of hit at a certain time, and then also like, Scream hit at a certain time as well, where it just kind of then popularized this sort of subgenre of found footage, and it paved the way for the different sequels to come out, and then also like imitators as well. But yeah, it has this, but then, I think if anything, like this ended up surpassing what the Blair Witch Project would have been, in terms of just like the money that was made for and like all this sort of stuff, which is just interesting. But then you have movies like The Last Exorcism, Apollo 18, The Devil Inside, and also VHS, which kind of came up after these as well. And then also having things like, it was made fun of in like Paranormal Entity, which was from the Asylum. You then also have like A Haunted House, which was a part of this as well, from the Wayans brothers. So yeah, I mean, I really do think like this legacy has been a thing because this really did hit at a certain point. And at the end of the day, really, like, this movie was very much like kind of a passion project from Oren Peli. Like, he wasn't like a trained filmmaker. I think he worked in like fucking like computer software design or something like that. Like, he didn't really come from a film background, and he was able to pretty much take money and be able to make this movie. He was remodeling his house at the time too, which is interesting. And but he was able to make something, and he wanted to make a scary flick, and he was able to do that. And because this is kind of a homegrown thing where it didn't rely on like a bunch of jump scares every 2 seconds, and it just relied on using like the atmosphere or like the sound design or anything like that. I think that's what really kind of made this stand out at a point. And I think also too, like, having a movie that it wasn't just a remake of something, which is interesting because this is going to then be remade by a bigger studio, right? So for them to actually keep the vision of like, oh, we don't need to remake this because it is the way it's good the way it is, and we could just make it better. We don't need to up and remake this with like new actors and like bigger things or whatever, because this is already scary enough. So I think that's where we have any kind of movie that kind of has that kind of stamp of like, oh, this is a big deal, or this revolutionized, or whatever the fuck you want to say about it. But like, it's just interesting how you can kind of tie it back to this. And, you know, for better or worse, it's going to be a movie that people still love and they enjoy a lot. And there's gonna be people who love it, hate it, whatever it is. But at least in my view, I guess, like I really generally did like the first one. I think I like the second one a little bit more. So it goes for me like Paranormal Activity 2, Paranormal Activity, and then maybe 3 is my bottom or whatever. Those aren't the worst movies in the world though. And I'm not going to talk too much about like the other movies, at least 2 or 3. The only thing you need to know is that the second one has to do with Christy, who is Katie's sister, and her husband and her stepdaughter and new son and everything. And then the third one is when they are kids in the 80s. So it kind of harkens back to that a little bit. So you find out some crazy shit. So yeah, but I think overall, like this film has had the legacy it's had just because like it's still fucking scary. It's still, for some folks, it's still scary. It's still something that, you know, people want to like put the headphones in and watch it and be like, ooh, scary bitch, you know? And there's nothing wrong with that. And I like that for people. And really, I can appreciate somebody, you know, making something and putting their whole heart into it, and they're putting their energy into it. And I think Oren Peli did do that, and he was able to then shop it, and he was able to get some traction with it. Obviously he got traction with it, but you know, it's just a nice break that he got, which is really cool. Because I don't think he was expecting that either. It wasn't like he had been grinding away forever and ever in Hollywood, right? He got very lucky, and that's awesome. So, you know, yeah, if anything, like this movie will have that place in horror history, whether we like it or not. And that's really that. But I think that's really all I can kind of say about Paranormal Activity. I don't have much else to say. Again, I would generally say that this is a fine movie to turn on. Maybe put on the, you know, headphones on it if you can. And I really do think like I will always get behind a movie that can kind of scare the shit out of people and can, you know, really not use like the cliches all the time. There are some maybe little cliches here and there in this movie, but overall I think they did do it perfectly well. And it was a fun time to watch, and it was a good time. So yeah, I think that's all I got to say about this. So we are now finishing out September with this episode. So thank you so much for listening this week. So next week we are starting October. Okay, so I got a lot of shit coming up in October. I have to, you know, edit a lot of these things. So that'll be fun. But next week we're actually going to be doing a little something different. I'm not starting off with a scary movie. Actually, I'm going to be starting off because it is the 20th anniversary of this film I'm covering. But next week you're going to be hearing about the one and only Mean Girls from 2004. Yes, that's because this is the 20th anniversary. So yeah, so be on the lookout for that episode about Mean Girls. We're talking about the movie. We talk a little bit of the musical, all that kind of fun stuff, and it'll be a good time. So. And then you'll see the rest of what I'm working on in regards to October. I got some spooky things coming up, so be on the lookout for that stuff. But yeah, tune in for Mean Girls next week. Of course, also, you can go and listen to my other podcasts if you are interested, Other Realm or Bust, which is a Sabrina the Teenage Witch rewatch podcast. So I actually have a couple of episodes going on with that. That also comes out on Friday. That'll be coming out on Fridays. So yeah, go check that out if you want to, and go follow that on social media, on Instagram. Follow me on Instagram and Letterboxd on this show. That's all in the show notes and everything. But I think that's all I have to say about today. But thank you so much for taking the time to listen to the Cult Cinema Circle podcast, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care. Bye.